Welcome here. We're continuing tonight in the Essene series right now, which was one of the major Jewish groups, the smallest, but one of the major Jewish sects during the time of Yeshua or Jesus in Israel. And so we're going to be talking more about some of the history of that tonight, and then also more about how that might relate to us now. Um, so, as with all the series, if you have comments, questions, inputs on that you'd like to share with me outside the meeting tonight, just email me. That would be great. Telling me, what your thoughts are or your experiences or your questions. If there's particular aspects of it that I haven't covered, you'd like me to cover, or things that I've talked about that weren't clear enough and you have questions about something I did share, please feel free to email me. I enjoy doing that. Also, want to um, mention a couple of things just at the beginning in case I forget at the end. But next week, the 29th, so next Friday, this series will be continuing for a couple more weeks, but next Friday, because of prior obligations we have, we're not doing the inner hour next Friday night, so there won't be one. So you can use that to research things on the Essenes or other first century groups if you like, and see what you come up with, or make a list of questions that you'd like me to do when we get back together. But then the following Friday, not next Friday, but the one after that, in September, then we're going to continue this series for a little bit and see, if there's enough interest in it, how long it goes, or if we switch to another series. And you're welcome to share with me ideas about topics too. Had a couple people do that recently, so we are going to get to those after this, at some point after this series. So that'll be great. Also want to mention that tomorrow, the Gather and Grow, which is our potluck and spiritual discussion group that we hold in homes periodically, which is going to be at Kathy Stark's home. It's from 12 to 4. It starts with a potluck. Then after that, we have a couple of hours of a group spiritual discussion. Um, that was full, but actually we just had a cancellation. So now there's an opening. And if Ani has any more information that you want to share with somebody, just turn on your mic. But there is an opening for another person right now. And if you all just,
Two,
sorry?
two people.
Oh, sorry, two. We're all good, see? So people need to, if they can go tomorrow, they should let you know tonight, though. Is that right?
Sure.
Or can they just show up
No,
to?
it would, I mean, it's, yes, we would appreciate it, but yeah, just so we know, and if 12 people say, I want like to, you
Right.
can say,
Yeah.
oh, no, it's not gonna work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so there's two openings as it turns out. So from the cancellation. So you're welcome to um, text, call. Actually, we don't usually have our phone on Friday night, but I'll leave my cell phone on, so that if you can come and want to come tomorrow, please either text or call us so we know in time to let Kathy know, and we don't end up with more people than we can fit in there, just in case a whole bunch of people can come tomorrow. Okay, that's good. So thank you. All right, onward and upward, hopefully.
You're
So,
gonna mention your surroundings.
oh, sure. Go ahead. You mentioned them.
Your surroundings are different.
Yes, I'm not in Ani's office. Well, it's actually all ours, but I'm not in the office where she usually works, which is the one with all the bookcases and all of that. Because as you may recall, we were having trouble with our computer the last couple of weeks. It finally bit the dust, so we had to go buy a new computer, which is now in that office, but isn't yet. We haven't migrated everything over from the old system. It's functional. It's going to be very nice, but some of you may have done that, especially if you have multiple computers. If you have like a studio or a recording space or an office space where you do Zoom meetings and whatnot, um, and you have things like microphones and speakers and monitors and the computer itself, and then you get a new computer, absolutely everything is affected. And then when you do that, and you have all new updates now, some of your old stuff doesn't work with it anymore, So you have to either do an update or it doesn't work at all. So you have to find a different application that will be similar to what you used, and now you can't because the new operating system won't run it. And
And sometimes you cry.
every single thing you have to do, every single thing requires a password. And that password then has to go through a two-step verification through somebody, God knows who, Gmail, AOL, Word, Google, whoever it is, Mac, everybody. And then you have to get that and sign in. And then if you do another update or hook up another piece of equipment, then you have to start all over with that again. It's just insane. So anyway. In the old days, there used to be this saying called going postal because there was a period of time decades ago where, for whatever reason, this was in the age way before so-called mass or active shootings were a thing of the news, way before that. One of the earlier ones decades ago was postal workers going kind of insane and shooting up people at the post office. So it used to be called going postal. I think we ought to have a new phrase called going computer because it's maddening. Anyway, enough of that. So I'm in a different space, and basically there's a plain white closet wall behind me that's not particularly inspiring to me or attractive to look at for an hour. So this is a panel, like a folding panel, which I kind of like actually. I think I like this one. But anyway, you don't have to look at the closet. You get to look at something a little more restful or something pretty, I hope, in the closet. So. Okay, that's enough of that. So all of our dramas, which have been going on for a day and a half now, with the new thing, plus not to mention having to reconfigure all of the wiring and everything with the modems and all the other stuff in the office, which is if you've never rewired an office after using it for decades, it's you don't even remember what half the wires go to. So anyway, that's all in process. So we've been having a really fun day. And I'm really happy that we're in our hour tonight. All right, so here we go, back into the Essenes, who had none of this to contend with. So that right off the bat, they were more peaceful. Um, okay, so again, I'm going to share some historical stuff, and at various points I'll pause, and you can, and at any point you have a question or comment, just turn on the mic and your camera, get my attention, and you can share it. But if not, at various points, I'm going to stop and ask certain questions. So, okay. So again, the Essenes, in case you missed last week, were one of the Jewish groups in the days of Yeshua. They were a smaller one, but a very, very influential one. They lived. The group lived in many different villages within Israel at the time, but there were two primary larger settlements of the Essene group. One was on Mount Tabor, which was kind of a school and training center, and the other was at a place now called Qumran, which is out in the desert on the northwest edge of the Dead Sea. And it's also the area the Bible often calls the wilderness. It's also the area that the Bible says John the Baptist lived, taught, and baptized at, in whatever the right word is. And so there's a lot of historical speculation that he was one of the Essenes, or at least very strongly influenced by the Essenes, and that the Essenes and John the Baptist very strongly influenced Yeshua, Jesus, because Yeshua was one of his students and was baptized by him at that place. So one other thing I mentioned before was that most of the scholars now believe that the so-called Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in the late 40s and early 50s, in over 200 caves, because there are many of them in this desert area around what's now called Qumran. And those were called the Dead Sea Scrolls by archaeologists. They have shed a tremendous light on Jewish practices and beliefs during the time of Jesus that we did not have before those were discovered. Most scholars believe that the Essene group wrote those. The Qumran Center was a contemplative center where they wrote new documents, and they also copied, because remember, there weren't books, photocopy machines. Historians estimate that at this time period, probably 3 to 5% of the entire Jewish population was literate. So by far, the most people in Israel could not read or write. Some could read and would be considered literate in that sense, but actually could not write. So very few people were able to do that. The Essenes had scribes, other groups had scribes as well, who could do that, and they would copy sacred texts, books of the Torah, books of Moses, books, writings of the prophets. Those all got hand copied, and it was a meticulous process to become a scribe because you had to be very diligent in being accurate and not missing words, putting your own interpretation in, changing anything. It was a very highly educated, very precise craft, and very highly regarded. So they found tons of copies of what would now be called the Hebrew Bible, which did not exist at the time because everything was just in pieces. There was no Hebrew Bible then, let alone New Testament, of course. But all these sacred writings were copied and stored and preserved at the Qumran area. The Qumran area actually was called Saqafa in, in the time of Yeshua. It was a settlement that the Essenes founded and developed there, and that's what its name was for a long time. Its more modern and current name is Qumran, but it's the same place, same area. That word, by the way, comes from the Hebrew root word sakak, which means, interestingly enough, remember this is a contemplative community out away from everything, unto itself. And that particular root word means to weave a protection, like a spider weaves a web, like to weave a place of protection. So it's kind of a sanctuary or retreat center. The Essenes, there are no Essene writings whatsoever that use that name Essenes. They did not call themselves that, so far as we know. That was a name outsiders called them. It was a word that basically meant separated, and because they separated themselves from all the other Jewish groups, they did not believe what the Pharisees taught or what the Sadducees taught or what the Zealots were doing. They did not believe in the temple because they believed it had been corrupted by animal sacrifice. They didn't believe that that was ever part of the teachings of Moses. They did not believe in the current priesthood at the time because the Romans had chosen who they wanted to be in the high priest and officiant positions at the temple after they took over Israel. So the rightful priesthood was no longer in power. Most of that group that cooperated with the Romans and got the high priest positions and other high positions was the group called Sadducees. We talked about these other groups quite a bit last week, so I won't go over that again this week. So I want to tell you more about the Essenes. So the Essenes, we know this from these writings. They, in their own writings, called themselves Yachad, which means community, basically, or a oneness of community or a oneness of spirit. They also refer to themselves as the way, Haderech, a word that Yeshua used for his own followers in the New Testament. He called them followers of the way. The earliest followers of Jesus in the Bible called themselves the way, the very identical term the Essenes used. The Essenes had a couple of unique phrases they used in their writing. One was, it was so from the beginning, or it was not so from the beginning. Yeshua uses that quite a bit. And the other phrase was sons of light or children of light and sons of darkness or children of darkness. And Yeshua uses that. The Essene group and Jesus in the New Testament are the only historical records of any Jewish groups in that era, in 200 years, in that time period, using those phrases. Nobody else talked about that. So sons of light and sons of darkness were Essene and Yeshua. The Essenes had a very highly structured community, and the head of that community, they had a spiritual head to the community, and what we might think of as a business manager or administrator head of the community. The administrator had nothing to do with spiritual teachings or training, had to do with logistics of the community, food, growing food, rules and regulations, commerce, those kinds of things. The spiritual head was called the teacher of righteousness. This particular teacher of righteousness, who's very exalted in the Essene writings, lived about 175 years before Jesus and died, as you can imagine, well before him. He died in 150 BC under the high priest Jonathan, who is referred to in the Dead Sea Scrolls as the wicked priest. He was a Jewish priest. He was a Jewish high priest at the time. And he had the teacher of righteousness put to death because of he believed that what they were teaching was contrary to the laws of Moses. Okay, so here's a few things about the Essenes that not only Dead Sea Scrolls, but archaeology is continuing. There's continually new discoveries about these sort of things. So here's a few just little historical tidbits, and I'll do a few of these and then we'll pause in a moment. One was that for a long time it was believed that all Essenes were celibate. Turns out that's not true. The priesthood of the Essenes, their own internal priesthood and spiritual leadership was celibate, but Essenes were allowed to get married and have families. The Essenes in their writings that we've discovered had many copies of what we consider the Hebrew Bible, or Christians call the Old Testament, including Psalms past 150. If you look at your Bible tonight, you'll see the last Psalm in it is 150. They had more past that didn't make it down to us. The Syriac Christian Bible today has Psalm 151. Theirs ends with an extra psalm. They also had found many years ago in the excavations a woman buried at Qumran, which was unusual because it was an all male or mostly male community. As far as residential, it was men lived there, not women. Women could interact and be there, but they did not live there. And a new discovery was that a woman that they found buried there earlier, that they thought kind of threw that all off, actually, that this woman that was buried there was buried less than 300 years ago, so way definitely not in that time period. Who and why she was buried there, we don't know, but positively not buried there during this time period. They also, in addition to all these sacred copies, they also have copied there's a copy of the Greek version of the Old Testament, which is really interesting in a Hebrew group. Another interesting thing is that the Gospel of Mark mentions a land called Gennesaret, not the lake, but the land Gennesaret, and that it is very near Capernaum. He describes exactly where it was. It's actually Kfar Nahum in Hebrew. And archaeologists just recently, in the last few years, have discovered that site. And it's exactly where Mark says it was. And archaeologists before said, well, that's just the Bible making up stuff again. Nope, it was right where he said it was, and now they found it. Also, according to the book of Acts, 6, 7, I think, it says that many priests, not of Jerusalem, became followers of Yeshua. Well, there weren't any priests not of Jerusalem, except, guess who? The Essene priests at Qumran. So that it's reasonable to believe that several Essene priests began to be disciples of Yeshua, according to the book of Acts. Another interesting, archaeologically, I find this very interesting tidbit, is at the Qumran Library, they have now translated copies, not only of the Hebrew Bible, but copies of parts of the New Testament, of what became, the New Testament didn't exist then, but pieces that got incorporated into it did exist then. And one of the main ones, which was the first gospel, was the Gospel of Mark. There are fragments of the Gospel of Mark in the Essene copies at their Holy Library in Qumran, which is pretty interesting. Later in this series, we're going to talk about a very early group of followers of Yeshua who only accepted the Gospel of Mark from the New Testament as legitimate, and all the rest of the New Testament, which is mostly Paul, but also the other Gospels of Luke, Matthew, and John. All of those other ones as being false and didn't accept them, just Mark. And they found that one at Qumran. So that's kind of interesting, I thought. So I want to give you a comparison and then we'll stop and have a bit of a discussion, I hope. I want to say some things about how the Essenes lived and what they believed, and how Yeshua lived and what he taught. So I'm going to start with the Essene side. No, I'll just do them side by side. It's easier that way. So the Essenes were a completely Jewish group. So was Yeshua and his followers, completely Jewish. The Essenes were, their faith was based completely on Torah and the prophets. So was Yeshua. The Essenes believed that there would be two messiahs, a son of David and a son of Joseph. And get the difference here, because Christians only think there were one, and that was Jesus, and that he was the one who fulfilled all the Jewish messianic prophecies about overthrowing Rome, establishing kingship in Israel again, judging the 12 tribes, putting an end to death in the world, various things that were Jewish prophecies about the Messiah, all of which, of course, Jesus did not do. But in the Essene writings, and this is based on the book of Zechariah, which also says there'll be two messiahs, the Essenes believed that the Messiah, son of David, would be the final Messiah and would defeat the enemies of Rome, would establish himself as both spiritual and political king of Israel, which Jesus didn't do, and would do all these other things spiritually. But that prior to him, there would be a first Messiah, and that first Messiah would be a son of Joseph, who was Jesus' dad. Yep. And before that Messiah, there would be a forerunner to prepare the people for him. And that forerunner would be the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. Who came before Yeshua? John the Baptist. When he was asked flat out by his disciples who John the Baptist was he the prophet that Moses predicted? Was he the Messiah himself? Who was he? Yeshua says quite directly, if you can hear this, he is Elijah. So there you are. Now, the son of Joseph was supposed to be a spiritual leader, not a political one. What was Yeshua? How many people tried to get him to become a political leader, thinking that he was, but he kept refusing. My kingdom is not of this world. So he fits that. The Messiah of Joseph would be rejected by the majority of Jews, which Yeshua was. He would be crucified. This is in Psalm 22 and elsewhere. He would be crucified and put to death, which he was. During the crucifixion, he would be stripped naked, which he was, put royal garments of purple on him and mocked and beaten with clubs and spit upon, which he was. That his right side would be pierced with a lance, which it was. So what they expected of the Messiah, son of Joseph, right down the line, and also what Psalm 22 says in your Bible, is exactly what did happen to Yeshua. So I find that pretty interesting. The Essenes, or the people of the way, considered themselves, they also called themselves the New Covenanters, the New Covenant. Have you ever heard of the New Covenant? That's what the New Testament is called. That's what the Essenes called themselves. Nobody else called themselves that. They held all property in common. We don't think or hear much about this anymore, but if you read in the book of Acts, you discover that it says that all the apostles and followers of Jesus sold all their property and put all the funds into a common fund and took care of each other out of that common fund. So they also had no common property. The Essenes believed in a realm of an angelic beings and demonic beings. So does Yeshua. He casts out demons. Hard to cast out something you don't believe in. He cast out demons and he talked about angels. So again, another comparison. The Sadducees, big group of Judaism, did not believe in angels or demons. The Pharisees did. They did believe in that. The Essenes believed the temple was corrupt and wouldn't have anything to do with the temple. Yeshua did teach at the temple, but also taught that it was corrupt And one of the corruptions the Essenes had was the animal sacrifices. And what did Jesus do when he finally went right before Passover to the temple? Who did he throw out? The animal people, the people selling animals, and the money changers who were necessary for people to buy sacrificial animals if they didn't have their own to bring. That's who he threw out. Uh, Jesus was clearly not mainstream Judaism of his day. Essenes certainly were not either. Shabbat was a big deal in the Essenes, and it was to Yeshua too. It says multiple times in the New Testament that he practiced Shabbat, that he went to synagogues on Shabbat, that he kept Shabbat, that his apostles and disciples kept Shabbat. Shabbat is a big deal. Still a big deal in Judaism. One difference about the Essenes is they did not use the Hebrew lunar calendar. They used a solar calendar like we do today, 365-day calendar, not 360. As a result, the calendars mismatched, as ours do today with the Hebrew calendar. And one of the confusing things in the New Testament is, was the Last Supper a Passover meal or was it not? Because it says that he's eating the Passover meal with his people, but as it turns out, we find out in other parts of the New Testament and other contemporary outside the Bible literature from that time period, Passover fell on a Friday, on Shabbat that day. And he was having his meal Thursday night. So was it before Passover or was it Passover? Or is one of the Gospels wrong and one of them right? Or how does that resolve? If you realize that the Essenes followed a different calendar, that year their Passover fell on Thursday. And the Pharisee and Sadducee Passover fell on Friday. Yeshua celebrated his when? Thursday. One more connection to the Essene group. Okay. Yeshua taught it was the end times, that there was going to be a reckoning where the wicked would receive their due, and so would the righteous, based on their deeds, not on what they believed, but based on their deeds. The Essenes taught that also. The Essenes placed great emphasis on ritual Jewish purity, laws and rituals. Yeshua did not. Not that he didn't observe any of them, but he did not emphasize that. He said that what you carried in your heart, or we might say consciousness, was far more important than what you put in your body or rituals. So there's a variance there. The Yeshua group and his apostles, if they talked about, he did not talk about slavery, but if he talked about slavery at all, when it's talked about by any of Yeshua's groups, they accept slavery because it was very commonly practiced back then. Much like our founding fathers accepted slavery. Not that they thought it was a good idea, but it was just what was done. That all changed later, but this was also done in the times of Yeshua. It was just kind of the way culture was. So there wasn't much said about it in the Yeshua group, but there wasn't any hostility toward it either, or condemnation of it. In the Essene group, no slavery was allowed, no slave ownership was allowed, and it was highly condemned. Yeshua was not an anti-weapon guy, even though he's portrayed that way. He's portrayed as the peacemaker, telling everybody to lay down their arms and never take up arms, and he lives by the sword, dies by the sword. That's actually, one could make a very strong case for that as a misrepresentation, which sometime we might do a series on, but probably not because nobody would want to hear it. But he actually was a proponent of self-defense, as is the Hebrew Bible. Self-defense is very strongly, not only permitted, self-defense in the Hebrew Bible is considered an obligation, as is defense of the innocent. Physical defense, including the use of violence for to protect the innocent, is considered a duty, not just a right. Essenes did not look at it that way. The Essenes believed that all violence for whatever cause was wrong and would not participate in any violent actions or carry any weapons or participate or work for anybody who manufactured weapons. I did not allow any weapons of war in their settlements. You couldn't bring a sword or a dagger or any of the common weapons at the time into those places. Yeshua had a zealot who was one of the groups who fought against Rome using violence. He had a zealot in his 12 apostle group that he handpicked, who carried a weapon all the time, so far as we know. and he instructed his disciples to carry weapons at two different points in the New Testament, and said if they didn't have any, to sell some clothes or some personal items and go out and buy them. So you can't exactly say he was a peacemaker in the sense that he's usually presented as all of that was never okay. Yeshua talked about sons of light and dark, and so did the Essenes. Just we'll take 2 more minutes on this, and then we'll stop. The Essenes had solitary morning prayers that we would probably consider a meditative or contemplative practice. So did Yeshua. It says over and over, early in the morning before the sun would rise, he would go out to the hills or by himself and pray and meditate. Or it says pray. I think he meditated. They practiced mikveh immersions. So did the Essenes. So did all the Jews, actually. There was a hierarchy of leadership in the Essene order. There was in Yeshua's too. Even in the letters of Paul, it talks about the hierarchy of the apostles and various and healers and people who speak in tongues. And there's a hierarchy of leadership there. There's a very distinct hierarchy of leadership in the Essene order, not identical, but very distinct. The Book of Enoch is something that we now have, according to recent discoveries again, but for centuries, the Book of Enoch has been written about in pre-first century, first century, second, third, fourth century historical documents. Book of Enoch was written about a lot. It was a very popular book in the Jewish culture back in the time of Jesus, and even before that, a couple hundred years before that. It never existed so far as we knew. It's like, what is this book everybody talks about? It's quoted in the New Testament, actually, in the book of Jude. But we didn't have it. Now we have it. And it's a phenomenal book. It's a Jewish mystical book. It's like reading a Kabbalah book. It talks about Enoch being taken up into these different levels of heaven, multiple levels of heaven, kind of similar to Paul's 3 layers, the third heaven that Paul talks about. It talks about many more layers of heaven, each higher and more sublime, and each closer to the Creator. So this book of Enoch is about how to make what in Kabbalah is called the Merkavah ascent, or the ascent of the soul in the chariot, to leave these lower realms of being and then get and enter into higher heavenly realms consciously, very consciously, not physically, but consciously. That's what the Book of Enoch is all about. It was very, very popular in Yeshua's circles. It's quoted a lot. It's talked about a lot. It's talked about in many, many letters that never made it into the New Testament during that time period. And now we have that book. That was the favored book in the Essene communities, was the Book of Enoch, and among the Yeshua followers as well. Alrighty. Hospitality was a really big thing to Essenes and to Yeshua's group. Essenes had secrets that only higher members of the order were permitted to access, kind of like the Masonic order and secret societies now. Yeshua did too. If you read the New Testament carefully, he teaches to the public in stories and parables and says so. And then to his apostles says, but to you, not to the world, not even to his believers, to his 12, he says, to you, I'm revealing the secrets of the kingdom, not to them. So there was an inner teaching in Yeshua's group and an outer teaching. And there was in the Essene order as well. So that's enough, I think, of that. We'll stop there for a moment. So, oh, wait. Yeah, we'll stop there for a moment. First of all, just with what I've said so far, my question is, which is not a rhetorical question, I'd appreciate anybody who has any comments on this. Does what I've shared just so far about the Essene practices and the Yeshua practices, did you know all that already? Is that really familiar to you? Is that new information to you? Do you find it interesting at all that there's such a remarkable similarity between what Yeshua taught and what the Essenes taught? So whether that's new or not to you, whether that seems significant to you at all, any reaction to that at all that you might have, how you look at that and what that significance might be. I'm going to quit talking, so I'm hoping somebody will either ask a question or make a comment along those lines while I have a sip of tea.
You know, when I'm teaching, I start calling on names. I think you should look.
Well, they could all be asleep. You never know. I might be waking them up. Um, so uh, I'm going to tell you one more thing, and then I'm going to ask specific questions. This one more thing, let me find it here, is okay. So there's a new thing that's called uh, the Damascus. It's an old thing that's been rediscovered, called the Damascus document and called the Manual of Discipline, the Essene Manual of Discipline, or the Covenants Manual of Discipline, or the New Way, or the Yachad Manual of Discipline, all meaning the same thing. So it says here that they had three priests who were their primary leaders. Think to Yeshua's group a moment. Who did he separate even from the 12 and tell those three things they didn't tell the 12? Peter, James, and John. He would take those three and tell them things we don't know what he said because it's not recorded, even separating them from the 12. Three. Essenes had three high priests. Essenes had a council of 12. How many apostles did Yeshua have? 12. Um, the entrance to the Essene order was much harder. You had to go through a 2-year penance and a year of silence and a lot of stuff Jesus didn't require. That's very difficult. But here are a few things that I'll tell you about, and then I'm going to ask you questions. Essenes were not permitted to marry until age 20, which actually was fairly old back then. Most people got married in the teens back then. They were not permitted to marry until age 20. At between age 20 and 25, they could assist the community. They could help with community meetings. They could help take care of the community. They could do work in the gardens. They could do things around the community. Otherwise, they were just students. They couldn't participate. But at age 20 to 25, they could participate. From age 25 to 30, they could actually start doing work in the community, meaning that they could help with the teachers. They could assist with teachers. They could assist with travel. They could assist with promotions, different than we have promotions, but promoting themselves. After age 30, they were allowed to participate in the community fully. And if there were very strict rules about marriage and sexual behavior as well, and what was and wasn't acceptable, which is pretty much the same rules Yeshua has in the New Testament. So just pausing there for a second. So up until the age of 20, the only thing you could do was study with the community. You couldn't do anything in the community. But at age 25, you could start being of service to the community. And at 30, you could fully participate in it. You could become a teacher, you could become a representative of the community, and so on. And if you look at the apostles of Jesus, so far as we know, we don't know for sure, but so far as we know, all of them that he gave authority to, none of them were under 30, so far as we know. But that could be wrong. So most of you, looking at the list here, um, haven't seen 30 for a while, but some of you are still in that area group. So if any of you here are under, and none of you are, but if any of you here are under 20, that means you could listen to what we're doing, but you couldn't do any other thing. You couldn't volunteer, you couldn't clean up, set up, uh, share these teachings. You couldn't do anything except listen. Once you hit 25, you could start doing that. Some of you are in that range of late 20s, early 30s, where you could start doing that. So you could start volunteering. You could start working in the gardens. You could start even preparing to be a teacher. And some of you are in that place right now. So um, given the fact that you're at the age you're at, most of you would be allowed to be teachers by now. Some of you are, some of you aren't. Those of you in your late 20s and early 30s could be training for that or could be helping out. So why do you have to be at least that old before you can start teaching? Why do you have to be at least 30 before you can be a teacher? By the way, another Jewish rule, Kabbalistic rule, not associated with the Essenes, is you cannot study Kabbalah until you're 40. That's not strictly adhered to these days, but that was the ancient rule. You couldn't study or teach Kabbalah until you're 40. How come? How come you have a rule like that? It beats me, huh? Yeah, Shuli
Steve.
and Tama. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things occur to me. Um, and this applies to the things you've shared, plus it applies today, and how many times there's way more overlap than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a discussion with many, many people who come from a different tradition and various traditions, yet so much of the key stuff is overlap
Yes.
that we talk about and the beliefs that we have. So I would think that would be true back then as well.
Mm-hmm.
And also, some of our greatest Kabbalists happened to actually die before they were
Before they
40.
were 40. I know.
Now,
I know.
that is a rumor that is not always honored.
That's right.
Yet,
That's right. Yeah.
you know,
If that were true, we wouldn't have some of our greatest Kabbalistic works because they were written by people who died before they were 40.
right, yet they were exceptional people and they thought in a particular way. And when we start going into mystical realms, so to speak,
Yeah.
if one is not mature in a certain way, it can lead them astray in all kinds of ways. It can be very confusing, it can be frightening, it can be
Mhm.
um, misread, all sorts of things. So I can see why that would happen. Yet somebody who is open in a particular way or sensitive in a particular way, they can start early.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of what comes up. It's a protection thing so that
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
doesn't become a more that it stays deep, that
Yes.
it doesn't become, what's the word? Um, Superficial,
Right.
I
Right.
think. It's a protection for superficiality.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Boy, that's that. Yeah. Very well put. Yeah. I agree with that. I think that's definitely so. Yeah.
that was all.
Thank you. That's great, Nahum. Thanks. Ted or Eunice?
As usual, it's Eunice.
Hello.
Heavy sub. Um, one of the things concerning the age of 40 is there's a parallel to that from Indian teachings, probably
Mhm.
uh, sound current, but I'm not sure,
Mhm.
where that's where I read about it anyway, where they have these three stages of life,
Yes.
of being a childhood, young adulthood, and the householder.
Yes.
And you are done with being the householder. In other words, raising your kids and so on. Then you can immerse yourself in spiritual study.
Hmm. Yep.
But like was also just commented on when you said that about 40, hey, a whole lot of people didn't make it that long. You were an old man if you made 40.
I know. I know. Old, old and yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And that is, I think that's, I know that it is in the sound current traditions. I think that's actually even in the Vedas. I'm pretty sure. I'm not positive, but I think it
I
is.
think it's beyond that it's beyond sound current, but
Yeah.
that's where I
Yeah.
came across that. So I can see where that would be an issue with these people too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You've got the huge distraction of family raising
Oh yeah,
and a moral obligation.
exactly. Exactly. And I have heard, in my some decades of doing this now, um, people who get on a particular spiritual path, particularly if it's a very inner one, a very meditative path, a very contemplative one, as opposed to just kind of a faith path in general, but a very, very inner focused one. I've heard a lot of people over the years just really struggling, like, oh my God, I'm taking care of these young kids and I don't have time to meditate, and I've got a baby and I'm up all night and I can't get my meditation in, or I'm taking care of my elderly parents and I don't have time. They're doing so many family things and they're feeling really guilty because they think they're not doing all their spiritual practices. That's one of the reasons these ancient traditions moved some of that to later, was handle your responsibilities to your family. That is your spiritual practice. And as you have more ability and energy and time to do the more inner focused things, because you have fewer of those required things that take your energy and time outside, then that's the time to focus on it. So yeah, that's a really good point too. Thank you so much. These are great. Anybody else? Yeah. So let me ask one other question. And the other question is, all of you have been are involved with the kind of programs and teaching that I'm doing for a long time, most of you for a long time. Um, and many of you are well past 30. So my question to you is, how many of you feel like you're ready to go out and teach? Or maybe I should say, do any of you feel like you're ready to go out and do that? Because if you've been studying with me, or if you've been studying with Unity here in Fort Wayne, or if you've been studying with ILM, or whoever, there's a good chance that at least in those areas, most of the people you're studying with are along my age somewhere. How much longer do you think we're going to be doing this? So who's coming next? That was one of the things that Yeshua was definitely concerned about, and why he was trying to train people so that he could entrust them once he wasn't there. Of course, he knew he wasn't going to be here very long, but that he could entrust them to continue that. Now, mind you, well, I'll stop there. So, what, how what do you think it takes to be ready to start teaching whatever this is that we're teaching? What does it take to do that?
Hey, Stephen, this is Liz.
Yeah, go ahead. Hi.
I know for me, hi, the first thing that jumps in my mind is a level of maturity that ego wouldn't get in the way
Mm.
beyond knowing the information.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first thing that jumped in my mind.
Thank you, dear. That's good. Yeah, I love that. Beyond the information is a very important part of that, and the ego not getting in the way. My personal qualification to that would be, I would say the ego not getting in the way too often, because it's really hard to not have it ever get in the way at all. But yes, I think that's a really important consideration, and I think that's partly why the age suggestion. Hopefully, you've had enough life experience to realize that sometimes you can be a real jerk and really caught up in your own stuff, and that doesn't really help somebody. So as we mature, we begin to kind of hopefully kind of get that in hand a little better. And also when we're very young, we tend to be really passionate about every new thing we discover and think it's the end all and be all of everything. And then 5 years down the road go, well, that was kind of good, but that wasn't really it. We kind of tend to get super enthusiastic about whatever is new right then that we understand, and think we've got the whole picture, and we don't. And as we live longer, we kind of see that that's not really so. We need to give it some time and sit with it. So that's great, Liz.
I,
Anything else?
I was surprised with myself. It was just even just a few months ago. I started to spin out with being better than for some reason. I started to spin out this crazy, offshoot. And I'm like, what's going on with me? I was just, whoa, I had to pull all that back. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah,
yeah.
good for you. It's really easy to do, isn't it? I mean, you can
Yeah.
do it and you're like way down that road somewhere. When did this start? How did I get this far along on here? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
good for you.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you. Ted or Eunice or both.
I'm sorry, it's me again. If there is any teaching I have done, it's been on a one-to-one basis.
Mhm.
That does happen in my life.
Mhm.
The other thing I think that is required for teaching is an authorization that comes.
Oh, I was hoping somebody would bring that up. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I've been useful. Okay, good.
Very, yes.
And then there's also a skill level, a personality thing that not everybody has, and certainly for working with a whole group,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, like my one-to-one sort of things is a whole different thing than even teaching a small group.
That's, yes, true.
I think there is a gift
Mm-hmm.
in, I think that teaching is its own gift,
Mm-hmm.
not just the knowledge and information, but that teaching is itself. I studied a lot. I studied art in college, and the professors would sometimes talk about having this conflict of whether they were an artist or if they were a teacher.
Yes.
And there were some, you know, and that's where I really saw it as being two separate. You could be an excellent artist and be a good teacher, but they would have their inner conflict about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some of them were lousy teachers.
Right. Right. Yeah, like I know some
Yeah.
extraordinary musicians who are terrible teachers. They wouldn't be a good music teacher at all, but they're excellent musicians. Or conversely, some music teachers that I know that are really good, but can't play as well as even some of the people they're teaching. But they know how to teach them the things that they need to learn, and they're very, very good at it. Yeah, that's a good point. So's the authorization point. Well, that's also really good. That's why in the Bible you see things like Moses appointing Joshua and Elijah appointing Elisha and Yeshua appointing there's a transmission of authority that's very biblical and beyond biblical. It really happens in spiritual traditions. That there does need to be an authority there, which is that. Thank you. That's good too. I just saw another
And
hand.
sometimes
So go ahead. Go
is
ahead.
simply, I think some of that authority is something you can come in with too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And um, the authority is a completely inner thing. But if you're continuing a particular line of teaching, then there's an authority that comes that pass where they have successor teachers that they like to do to keep it in the same line. But yeah, the spiritual authority is a totally inner thing. Was it Shuli or Nahama had a hand up?
It's it's me again.
Oh, good.
Did
Hi,
you?
you again.
It's Nahama.
Smart
Yeah.
Alec.
Um, what I've found in my own experiences, and I've taught different things,
Mhm.
um, is that, and I think this is tied to the ego. Sometimes I had to get out of the way
Mhm.
to be able to let the wisdom that I had to share
Yeah.
come through. And also there was this drive, some coming from a deep place inside of me, because the things that I was learning or had learned or was wanted to share had been such a gift to me.
Yes.
And there was the desire to share the gift.
Yes.
And the greatest thing is that at some point, I just surrendered to, okay, if I'm meant to teach, the students will appear, kind of thing.
Say that again, because that is hugely important in my opinion, and often not understood. So would you say that again?
Uh, If I am meant to teach, the students will appear.
Mhm. They
That
absolutely do. Yes, yeah, go ahead.
it just, I can't go out. I mean, I can offer, this is what I have to teach. Does anybody want? And if that's something that's meant at this point in time, those students will appear. And maybe 6 months later or 6 years later, the students will appear and nobody appears then. Or maybe students appear and 6 years later they're gone.
Right.
It varies.
It does. Yeah.
It's a process.
Yes.
And me as a teacher has been a process. And the one thing I have learned, one of the things I do right now at my synagogue, one of the things is I give regularly the drash, or what people would call a sermon.
Mhm.
Talk about what we're reading in the Torah or some other topic pertaining to that
Mhm.
on a Saturday morning. And it was an interesting process to learn to not only look at what was being talked about, what we were going to read, but to then just let the wisdom guide me. And I've gotten to this point where I don't know what I'm going to say. I walk in and I let it come through. And I have been so supported since I've done that in so many ways. People come up to me and say some very positive things as I let go of the control of, I have to get this right, to
Yeah.
I'm handing it over to you, let it flow. And it doesn't mean that I don't think about it or whatever. And I always have notes, 2 or 3 bullets at least that I never look at when I talk.
Right. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
There's a certain level of surrender, and that's part of, I'll have this to teach and the students will appear. That's another kind of aspect of the surrender.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, and so I think that that's important. And I think I know we need to wrap up here. I think that's important. And I think that um, the ego part, one of the things that I have observed is that if somebody is really inwardly, so to speak, um, called to share in that way, to be in that teacher role. Not just, I mean, we all teach each other. I mean, that's a whole other thing, but we all teach each other. We learn from each other all the time on a one-by-one basis. But for somebody who's really feeling moved into that teacher role in a community somewhere, students will appear if that role is really right for them at that time. And then the other thing is that when they go to teach, what they're really dedicated to inside comes out over a period of time, not necessarily in one class or one talk or whatever. But if you watch them over a period of time, what they're really devoted to inside comes out. So if they're really devoted to whatever we call this, we call it spirit or the divine or God, if they're really devoted to that inside and are willing to get their ego out of the way the best they can and lay that aside and really let that wisdom come out, that's what comes out. Even if it comes out a little rocky sometimes, or maybe not in the perfectly honed speech or whatever, but that's the purity of that wisdom comes out. On the other hand, people who are in those teacher roles, who really inwardly are devoted to their own ego, over time
Mhm.
that becomes really clear too. And
Mhm.
as you hear more and more of their teaching, you just hear me, 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 me. And you start going, oh, wait a minute, I'm not sure this is really from spirit, and so it's kind of like Yeshua, you'll know them by their fruits. If you follow somebody long enough in that role, you'll see what's really central in their consciousness, because that's what will be revealed in their teaching. And and all of us, at least me anyway, um, that ego is a constantly present thing. That's not bad, but it's just that's not where we need that to function in certain aspects of our lives, but that's not where we want to be bringing the spiritual teachings over from. We want that to be coming from a much deeper or much higher place than that. And I'll end with telling you a really short thing because it applies to everybody, I think. But it's something I learned from Reb David Cooper. There was a particular thing that he did, a particular type of meditation that he did that I found very powerful. And it was very similar to something I already knew about, but had never used. And so I wanted to start using that periodically with some of my students. And because I got really the form of it from him, I didn't want to use it without his permission because there's kind of an honoring of teacher things that goes along with all of this too. And so I approached him privately and asked him, what would he think about me using this particular thing that I learned from him, this meditation practice? And his answer to me was, of course you can use it. It's not mine, which is an answer you'd expect from David if you knew him. But then he said, but I would caution you to do this. If you are feeling the spirit of teaching leading you to share that, then by all means do. But if you feel your ego pressing at all with that, then just step back and don't do it. And I thought, wow, that's such good advice for everything. It's like, so that really meant something to me. And I can tell tell the difference. So that was very, very helpful to me. And I think it's great advice for anybody who's in a position to be in some kind of leadership or teaching role in your own community. Even if it's a small one, we want to try to emulate the highest in us and bring that forward, and not all of our personal little vendettas and prejudices and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, thank you all for sharing tonight, those of you who did, and those of you who just listened, for being here. So I'm going to ask you to just take a brief moment, because we're at that time already, and pause and just come back to that place of peace within yourself. And there is, whatever we call it, however we relate to it, there is at the very core of our being that which is very pure and holy, that we feel as love, that we experience as peace, that we know as wisdom. We call it lots of different things, but at this very, very deep core, it is from that all the good in our consciousness arises, all the awakening, all the wisdom, all the understanding. So taking time to periodically refresh ourselves by just holding in that space with no other intention than to be in that space is very healing and very restorative. And also making sure we have time in that space before we teach and time afterwards to reflect on what came through us and where we could have maybe opened to a deeper level and where we opened well and it worked. And especially in times of stress in our lives, to take a moment away from that stress and to come back to this inner quiet again and just sit with that. And then whatever comes forward from it, to begin to act on that in our lives. So may this be a week of peace for all of us, and may we help those who are struggling to find greater peace within themselves. And those of us who are facing anything difficult this week, including people who are facing medical procedures or surgeries or family situations or anything that's going to be frightening or painful or difficult, may this peace abide with you through that process. And may the spirit that is in and among all of us abide with you in that process as well, so that you know you're not going through it alone. Thank you for being in our hearts and part of our community. Thank you for being here tonight. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Uncle Stephen.
I love you, Shirley.
Love you too.
All right. Good night, everybody.